So this isn't going to be a full-out, like, well-made video essay, but I had a lot of thoughts I wanted to share, so I'm going to. Actually, I changed my mind and I want this video to be perfect, but it's already far from that, so let's just pretend it's really well done, okay? Thanks. Basically, I went into Nod Krai with hopes, but not high ones, but hopes nonetheless because I heard a lot of people liked it and they were comparing it to Fontaine. So ultimately, I was a little disappointed with Act 1 and 2, but only as disappointed as one can really be while assuming it wasn't going to be spectacular. For a frame of reference, I liked Fontaine's story. I thought it was cool and good. I would rate it like a 6 or 7 out of 10, which I personally find a very good rating. For more context, I would give most other Archon quests around like a 3 or 4. Yeah, sure, a lot of Genshin's writing is subpar, but it's by no means the worst writing I've seen by a long shot. As far as I'm concerned, they do some things well and some things not so well. I'll start by talking about Acts 1 and 2 because I had originally written the video that way, and then I'll talk a little bit about 3 and 4, which I liked a lot more. For me, the Traveler's motives actually felt a little more tangible within Acts 1 and 2. They had the same looking for their sibling kind of goal, but they made it more concrete by looking for remnants of their spaceship. This didn't actually take us very far, but it was something, at least to get us started. So this is all to say that I think this time the Traveler's motives were set up a little better because of the emotional backing which was driving them, and it felt more in reach. The other characters that were important to note the motives of were Llama, Flynn's, and Columbina. Ideally, I think they would have started developing Nefer's motives as well, being that the next part of the quest focuses on her. Establishing not just conflicting motives which were present between her and Llama, but a strong backing for those motives would have made the conflict between them a little more powerful. Due to her role as a side character, as of now, I can forgive the lack of development, but still recognize that if they had fleshed out her background a little more, it would have made for a stronger character and story. They could have given Nefer a little more, and I know they could have because they did with Columbina. Columbina was a side character in the first 2 acts, but they did establish which emotions drive her, which made her a far more fleshed out character. My biggest critique are of Llama and Flynn's. When the livestream came out, they announced that character story quests were going to become integrated into Archon quests. And I was very excited about this, because HSR has been doing something akin to this for a while now, and I think it's helped the writing of these stories immensely. This brings me back to a sentiment that my screenwriting professors always tried to hammer into our brains, which was that plot doesn't drive character, character drives plot. We can have an entire discussion about narrative theories of personal identity and whether or not this is true, but I tend to agree with this idea, and whether you do or not will also likely indicate how much you agree with my takes on the story. But what does this quote mean? For me, it means that things don't just happen to characters, but that characters cause things to happen to them. It emphasizes the active role of the character in the story, and it also acknowledges that events or plot is shaped by the way that a character understands the things they experience. How does this pertain to Llama and Flynn's? Both of them were positioned to take central roles in their respective acts, while emphasis on their lives and motives I think did help keep the story grounded. I ultimately wished they were more active characters. For Llama, a lot of her goals didn't seem tangible. I think there was a lot of potential for her goal of revealing the truth about the sky to the Frostmoon Scions to be very emotional, but this is a difficult thing to achieve when you're not getting any story from her point of view. The goal that we were made aware of from the Traveler's perspective was that of trying to stop the Tui from obtaining the Moon Marrow. Now, having these goals, which are more geared towards stopping something from happening rather than making something happen, isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's easy for these goals to end up leading to having characters that aren't very active in the story. This changed when the Moon Marrow was in fact stolen and Llama was forced into action, which helped, but the shift didn't take place until around halfway through her part of the story. Similarly with Flynn's, his goal was to stop Revere from obtaining the lamp, or the last shard of himself. He also did have the goal of clearing his name, but frankly his presentation in the story did not make it seem like he was all that worried about this, making it feel as if it weren't really a question of whether it would happen or not. In the case of Llama, the lack of motives weren't quite as detrimental due to the fact that much of the quest did focus on the Traveler, and fell back to being connected to the Traveler's own motivations about finding their sibling. In Flynn's case, this made the story feel worse off because of how the Traveler's goal had already shifted from one with emotional backing. The shift to saving the world was not great to me. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have a goal of saving an entire nation, but we know it's difficult to maintain stakes around that. You need a small concrete connection or else the goal might lose its effect. In addition, I was thinking in the first two acts, the use of flashbacks could have been useful. Sure, they feel a little cheap, but in my opinion, it's better to get the motives across, even if you have to do it in the cheap way, rather than not. Flynn's was sort of a letdown for me in terms of character development and story. I actually thought the mini-quest that they did to unlock the meetup points with Flynn's was better in terms of developing his character than the entire second act was. I was surprised by how emotionally compelling that quest felt in comparison to what I had just completed. Being able to have the traveler live through what a day in his life looked like helped establish who he was and explain what drives him and how he thinks. We did learn a lot about him in the quest, but these felt like more quantitative things rather than qualitative things, if that makes sense. The last thing I want to say about motives is the one thing which Genshin has not done that I thought would maybe be introduced in these quests, which is something that HSR has done a lot, are perspective changes. At least this is true for the first two acts. I don't think perspective changes are necessary to clarify a character's motivations, but I certainly think they're a pretty effective and easy way to get across what a character wants. I think Flynn's part of the story was rather rushed near the end. He sort of just explained his backstory all at once and what his emotional drive was. Because it all came at once, it didn't feel as connected to his actions as it could have. I know he's mysterious and all, but again, perspective changes could have helped with this. Additionally, he may have felt more mysterious if his motives were revealed to us over time and it would have left us guessing. I'm going to talk more about conflict now because I think conflict is a very useful tool in establishing characters' motives, and when you have clear conflicts, these motives become more obvious, and you're reminded of them more as they're constantly being challenged. This area did disappoint me in Acts 1 and 2. There were many points in which I felt like there were opportunities to up the tension of the story, and they were not taken. This lack felt most impactful when the Traveler quickly owned up to stealing the Moon Marrow, and Lauma was so quick to forgive them. I know this was in character for them, but I think this could have been done differently nonetheless. First, they could have had the Traveler own up to their role in stealing the Moon Marrow, but have dragged it out so that during their journey to get it back there was heightened conflict as the Traveler attempted to walk the line between helping a friend while not being ready to own up to a mistake. Secondly, the underlying issue which plagues this game is that so few of the characters are flawed enough to keep tensions high. Even if the Traveler had put off revealing the truth, we'd still have to deal with the fact that Lauma is too unwaveringly forgiving. Her immediate and foolhardy forgiveness of the Traveler left me feeling disappointed because of the potential that even a moment of wavering could have had to create tension if it was used at the right time. This would have been cool to see all come to light when they finally faced the Wild Hunt at the end of Act 2, giving Lauma the opportunity to still be forgiving, but doing so after a small bit of an internal struggle. There was also that point in which the Traveler chose to be honest with Lauma and disclose that they were indeed a Descender after Lauma had already explained reasons to potentially have reservations about trusting Descenders. This only seemed to create more trust, which runs a bit too rampant for my taste in these stories. Ultimately, in the end, I know it's just in line with her character, but even just a bit of hesitancy to trust the Traveler perhaps would have created a little more tension, especially after the whole Moon Marrow incident. Like Lauma, I also struggled to find flaws in Flynn's. I think the closest thing we could find in Flynn's as a flaw is probably just his awkwardness. Being Fae, he doesn't completely seem to have integrated himself into, human culture. This definitely could have been played up more during the murder investigation. Ultimately, this game acts, however, like it's allergic to creating characters who are not unwaveringly perfect, and in doing so loses out on a lot of opportunities to create tension. My third and biggest gripe in the story was in Act 2, when Rivere was quickly able to sow mass chaos among the people of Nasha Town. This was something that I wish was established earlier in the story to a greater extent. It did feel very sudden that the town was pushed into complete chaos, and might I say, they came back from it pretty quickly. There could have been more hints of this chaos coming earlier, and emphasis of the great mistrust which was coming to be. It did feel very sudden that the civilians were turning against each other. I think Act 1 could have played this up more in preparation for Act 2, and I think Flynn's being used as a suspected murderer would have been a good way to show this distrust. I think more dissent among the Frostmoon Scions after Lauma reveals that the sky is fake and that the moon they've been worshipping is also fake could have created more mistrust between the people as well, which would have driven up things and made it feel more natural when everyone was all of a sudden turning against each other. Basically, I love when characters' good choices end up making their situations more tricky. I don't think this conflict was entirely a failure, however, because I often find in these quests the antagonist of the story is very abstract and a group or a force rather than a individual, which makes what the characters are facing feel less real and less imminent. I think using Rirrir as the manifestation of evil in this rather than simply leaving it abstractly to the Fatui or the Wild Hunt was a very good idea. I think this opportunity was missed in the first act when they made the antagonist the Fatui as a whole, where they could have used Sandrone. It would have made the conflict feel more tangible, and let's be real, her personality is already antagonistic enough that this would have worked great. Speaking of, she gave up the Moon Marrow way too easily for that entire quest to have felt worth it, but I will refrain from giving suggestions on how to make this better until we learn more about her. While I was doing Acts 1 and 2, I felt like there was a lot of room for Nefer to put up more resistance to what Lauma was trying to do, and I thought the same thing about Acts 3 and 4, but I'll get to that later. Overall, the things that I would have liked to see change in Acts 1 and 2 were issues that were pretty much in every quest and not just present in Nod Krai. After I'd completed the first two acts, my hope for the story was that they'd do better identifying characters' motives and adding in some emotional stakes and keeping the antagonistic force as an individual who represents a whole. It is becoming difficult for me to keep up with the lore just because it doesn't feel connected to an emotional narrative, which is what sticks with me personally, but I am aware this is not an issue for everyone. Of course, there were other issues I had with Acts 1 and 2, but these were the biggest ones that felt important to me and what I'd like to see changed in the future. Now let's talk about how Acts 3 and 4 did so much better, because they kind of addressed these things. Act 3 had a very quick start, and I think that was very beneficial. We picked up right away by showing what the threat was. A lot of times the beginnings of these quests start with too much talking. It was nice to see just how great the threat was, and how Columbina's power was very minimal compared to Ririr's. I was actually hooked right off the bat, despite there being a few things that could have taken me out of the story. First of those being Varka. I did not like Varka's part of this story. I don't like Varka. I'm not going to elaborate on this too much because I'm going to choose not to take up any issue with it because it was so fucking goofy. I'm just going to leave you with this line.
Oh, this place is hopping. It's probably a good thing one of us left. Otherwise, we might not fit all these people in.
Also, Acts 3 and 4 did POV changes. I have to talk about one specific scene that made this act for me. Because I have low expectations for these quests generally, I get very excited when they do something right. When they swapped POVs right after the Traveler and Columbina encountered Arlecchino, well, I was very excited. There are so few times in these quests that they use POV changes, let alone do them correctly. Now we have something to look forward to in the rest of the story. Seeing them actually limit the information they were giving us about important plot points in the story and move on to different perspectives and keeping us looking forward to what's going to come next made this feel like so much less of a chore to do. Another thing to say about POV changes, I'm so glad they didn't force us to play through Nefa's and Aino's POV as they set up the fake Columbina sort of things. I think that would have been an incredibly boring thing to sit through given everything else that was happening, so I'm so glad they did not force us to play through every POV. Although all the characters did feel integrated into the story and like they had a reason to be there that was strong, it did unfortunately feel like an Avengers Assemble moment. This was probably due to Varka's tone and just all-around energy. I don't like when they get all the characters together to sort of unite for one cause, especially when their motives are underdone, which did continue in these two acts, unfortunately for me. Interestingly enough, they actually, I think, did a better job developing Rirrir than any of the protagonistic characters. I really liked how they did Ririr's story, sort of moving us between points in time and not leaving us to sit through any pointless conversations. His narrative was broken up enough for me to stay engaged. However, I think they could have also broken it up more and left us waiting to get that information just to keep us engaged. I would have liked to have seen him forced into his position as an executioner with greater force. I know he was portrayed as sort of a nobody in Khaenri'ah. Even more than that, I would have liked maybe an emphasis on what that meant for him financially, potentially, or for his own survival. Nonetheless, I do think that they actually put in some good work with Rirrir, and his part in the story was successful for me. I loved the thematic elements that were integrated into his story. I liked how they represented the sinners as chess pieces that we were moving around as the player. And I also have to point out that throughout this story, they actually told a story within a story, which is how you do intel gathering. The goal of intel gathering is something that is present in a lot of stories in Genshin, and I usually find it done incredibly underwhelmingly. In this case, however, they actually did it well. The means by which they gathered intel did feel a little easy, but I was willing to overlook that when I was experiencing the story due to the fact that we actually had another story to be involving ourselves with and understanding. While this worked for Rirrir, however, it did not really work that well for Nefer's story. We'd already gathered someone else's backstory via this method of exploration, and so learning about Nefer's backstory in the same way felt a little cheap. Additionally, I don't think it was paced as well. It was given to us all at once, and we didn't have any sort of moments to step back and see how her choices are relating to this. I talk a lot about how flashbacks over time can help illuminate a character's choices by showing them going back and forth between present and past, and showing how the past is directly affecting what they're doing in the present. We got her past all at once, so for me it felt a little lacking. For this video, I'm mostly talking about the good things that Acts 3 and 4 did because I did find it engaging, and when I looked back on this story, I was looking for why it worked rather than why it didn't. I still had a lot of issues, and I think that there are many things that could have made it done better, but it did enough of the things that I was hoping for me to actually feel invested in the story. This was achieved by keeping the tension high, and this was done by keeping knowledge from us and only revealing things to us at certain times. Part of what a lot of Genshin stories are missing for me is an element of mystery, and I know that sounds kind of surprising at first because Genshin's entire story is sort of focused around the traveler finding their sibling and unraveling the mystery of Teyvat. However, I think there's a difference between having mysteries be present and having the story told like there's a mystery that needs to be solved. In Nod Krai, not only was the mystery present, but it was being told like there was a mystery there. There was multiple times over Acts 3 and 4 when the whole story wasn't given to us. One situation which stood out to me specifically was when the protagonists went into battle with Rirrir. We were not given the full picture of how this battle was supposed to be won, however, afterwards and throughout it, we saw the planning that took place behind the scenes. In past Genshin stories, including Fontaine's even, which I've said before I thought was done very well, we'd often have moments where the characters all come together and we listen through the entire plan. For me, that's a little too much information. It feels more effective when they subtly plant different pieces that allow us everything to come together in the end. Genshin tends to give us too much information. Yes, we often get the same information multiple times, but that's not exactly what I'm referring to. Genshin gives us too much information in the sense that they tell us too much about how things are going to unfold, rather than leaving subtle clues which sort of lead us to that conclusion, and formulates it in a way that when it comes together, it makes perfect sense, yet it still feels like it was planned out even though we didn't actually see the fine details. This was not done perfectly in Act 4 when they all went into battle with Rirrir, but it was good to see that they didn't force us to sit through conversations where they would explain the details of how exactly it was going to happen. So while it wasn't perfect, it still felt like the right direction for me. And I see potential for an even more amazing story to have been told, but I'm really not looking for excellency right now. I'm looking for decency, and this story definitely made it to that point for me. So yes, I had a lot of issues with Nod Krai's story thus far, but I was also overall happy with how it went. Anyways, that pretty much wraps it up. I've said everything that was really important to me. If you want to talk about this more, you can come to my Twitch chat. There is a link in the bio for your convenience. Or you could leave a comment. That's also cool, but please be nice if you do. Remember to like the video if you want to do that, and subscribe if you want to do that. And of course, whatever you go on to do, do it well.